Hey, welcome once again to La Casa di Moretti there, Grasshoppers. Happy Super Bowl Sunday. As many of you already know, this is kind of a holiday for me. But I'm really not here to talk about the fact that I think the Chiefs are going to win the Super Bowl as much as I am to introduce this lesson on social progressivism for you guys. As you know, I'm not in school today. So you're seeing this on Monday. But let's begin. The idea is for me to run you through social progressivism. Then when you're done, you're going to read an excerpt by Upton Sinclair's The Jungle and respond to it in a journal. Okay? So let's not waste any more time. The module is, as usual, embedded here in the in Canvas, and you can see that I want to start with what is called Muckraker journalism, okay? So Muckraker journalism, as I describe it, is similar to yellow journalism. It's kind of sensationalistic, okay? It definitely wants to call attention to the problems, especially urban problems in the early 20th century. So again, this is the progressive era. So muckraker journalism was really popular between like 1890 and 1920-ish, okay? And these muckrakers, unlike the yellow journalists, they are grounding their stories in reality. Their favorite method of reporting is the expose, all right? And you guys have probably seen that before. You're familiar with it in today modern reporting that is done either on TV networks like Fox News or CNN, or even in online journalist stuff. You'll see the exposing of problems, okay? Because the exposing of problems sells, but it also calls attention to fixing the problem, right? It's important that you realize that the muckraker journalists are here to expose the problems they feel should be fixed while making money doing so. But they don't offer solutions. The solutions are going to be left up to the United States government. And that's the difference, right? The journalists expose, the government fixes. That's kind of what muckrakers are trying to accomplish here, okay, with their journalism. They often put their stuff in magazines that were circulated, sold to the public. Example of a famous kind of muckraker style magazine that no longer is a muckraker magazine is Cosmopolitan. That's right, Cosmo magazine. The magazine that today talks about things like, 21 ways to please your man, or how to pick out the perfect style of underwear, or whatever it is that's in Cosmo these days, used to actually serve the purpose of exposing social ills for the public, okay? Typically, muckrakers worked in the cities because that's where most of the problems were. Not too many people are flocking to find out, like, what went wrong with the barn raising in Hebron, Illinois, right? Like, they're working in cities because that's where all the attention is. And remember, I told you that before that urbanization has brought along like entertainment options, but it also brought around a lot of problems that are still being fixed because the Gilded Age did like nothing to fix them. Remember the progressive goals, right? This is all motivated by a fear of socialism. Okay, let's expose these problems. Let's have the government address these problems so the working class doesn't get too carried away, so to speak, okay? And if you don't have these already, you should pretty much understand these as the goals of the progressive era. So let me call attention to a case study that muckrakers would have focused on and made not only headline news in New York, but across the nation. And that is the case study of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in 1911. To this day, it serves as one of the worst tragedies, industrial tragedies in United States history. In this case, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, which was basically it was a sweatshop, on the top and next to the highest floors of a building in New York City, where we found out later that the ladders that the firemen used to try and help people escape weren't tall enough to reach the actual stories that the fire was on. Okay, and so the people had no hope of getting out once the fire started, and it's going to result in a highly publicized trial, after which the company owners and whatnot are going to get off relatively unscathed, as usual, but the public is going to demand reform, right, as a result of this incident. The victims of the fire were, sweatshop workers like these pictured here, mostly Italian and Jewish immigrants. They were young women, and the shirtwaist company obviously worked with a lot of threads and a lot of textiles, and ostensibly the fire began when somebody threw out a cigarette or dropped a cigarette into a bucket of lint that quickly caught fire and engulfed the place in flames. The fire escapes proved to be inadequate, despite the fact that it had passed public inspection. The elevator that a lot of people tried to escape in ended up, collapsing. People jumped down the elevator shaft in order to try and be saved. Some were saved by heading up to the top floor by the stairs, because the flames could not get them standing on top of the actual building. But then the stairway up to that collapsed in the flames and everything. And eventually, workers trapped inside the building ended up jumping to their deaths, as pictured here on the pavement below, right? This is your standard, capitalism doesn't care about its immigrant workers. It was routine to lock fire escape doors so that women couldn't escape on smoke breaks, okay? And when they were trapped in there, they ended up jumping to their deaths onto the pavement below, as this photograph shows. And of course, there was a public showing of the bodies in order to try and identify who was who after this. So this incident, highly publicized, is going to push for urban reform. You remember one of the worst elements of the Gilded Age was municipal corruption, okay? So take a look at this political cartoon, which is a great example of a Muckraker political cartoon, right? I'll give you a chance to examine it here. And so you see something like this, and its depiction, with the inspector of buildings, right? No problem. Your building is safe, okay? Only the fire escape collapses. You don't worry about it, right? And it's okayed by the city commissioner. And so this is the sort of thing that people are fed up with. This is New York City, which is where, in many ways, New York City was the center of the Muckraker journalist movement, because it was the largest city in the country, and the one that kind of is a symbol of everything that needs to be changed, okay? So I'm going to mention some specific Muckraker journalists that could come up on an AP exam. So I'm just going to give you a smattering of them, right? The first is Jacob Rees, and he writes a famous expose. It's basically, I own it. I own a copy of this. It's a series of essays, if you will, combined with photographs from New York City of the things that he's showing. And Jacob Rees particularly wanted to show the plight of immigrants in the major cities like New York City, and the way they had to live and try and survive and scratch and claw their way, right? And again, the fear is that if life continues to be this bad for this group of people, there could be a socialist uprising, okay? Here you've got a famous image that I've seen on the cover of his works, like the Orphan Children of New York, right? Which is one of his chapters is about that. If you guys remember me teaching you about the immigrant housing that goes along with urbanization, this is where you stayed when you got off the boat and you didn't have a better option. A flop house, right? 5 cents a spot, famous photograph showing the way these folks live. These guys, you know, all their belongings kind of trundled in together here, and you get a little hole in the wall for 5 cents, okay? This is what you graduated from, right? Once you made enough money to scrape together to live in a tenement house, okay? And here is what the tenement houses tended to look like. And you can tell the dilapidated nature of them. This is what you saved money in order to live in, right? And I told you guys that real estate people were very unscrupulous, and they would price gouge these immigrants who didn't speak English very well, take advantage of them. And dilapidated places like this sometimes went for less money than nicer townhomes, like nice middle-class townhomes, you know, across town, because these landlords knew they can get away with it. And in this instance, Rees found that the people living here were, the sewage line was broken. And so the raw sewage was spilling directly underneath the feet of the participants in the house, because they noticed the smell when you walk in there. They were literally standing on raw sewage. So places like this are going to breed diseases like cholera, and they're going to spread just horribly, okay? And this is the reason why other progressives opened up settlement houses like Jane Addams, who I already taught you about, okay? Meanwhile, there's John Spargo, okay, crusader against child labor. John Spargo was a British socialist. He's got an interesting, and he came to America and then lived here. But his crusade was against child labor. What's interesting about him is he was a socialist, but was also an ardent anti-communist, to remind you guys that they're not the same thing. Like Spargo later in his life railed against the Soviet Union, okay? But was a defender of socialism, because socialism is not communism, okay? Soviet communism is terrible, right? But as a socialist, he was interested in regulating the economy, and child labor, ending child labor, is a part of that, okay? Particularly, he wrote an expose called The Bitter Cry of the Children, okay? About what it was like for children in living in these coal mines, or working in these coal mines. What I want you to do is pause my lecture video right now and just quickly read this excerpt from The Bitter Cry of the Children, okay, to give you a feel for it. And then, so I'll pause, read it, come on back. Okay, so you got a chance to read it. John Spargo's Bitter Cry of the Children, okay? Ida Tarbell. She is a well-known muckraker who published in installments in another magazine, not Cosmo, but something called McClure's, I think it was, magazine, where she took on John D. Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company, all right? Her dad was an exec for the oil companies and saw the way that they treated people, the way that they treated the businesses they took over in order to create a monopoly on the oil industry. Her expose of the shady practices, right? She wrote this in the history of the Standard Oil Company in 1904. Her piece on this ended up exposing the monopolies and trusts in such a way that it helped lead to the antitrust lawsuit filed against Standard Oil in 1911, the one that was filed by Taft's administration, and that Rockefeller had a problem with because he felt that oil was a good to trust, okay? Well, I would say that Ida Tarbell would beg to differ on the goodness of the monopoly created by John Rockefeller. All right, so we'll pivot a little bit now and talk about the suffragists. So women's suffrage is now back, all right, as I tried to explain to you guys before. When the Civil War ended, throughout the 19th century, especially in urban settings, women are arguing for the vote. And one of the biggest things they're arguing is that it's, especially with more women working now in these urban settings, and with the fact that some women out west, like I told you, can vote in Western states at the local level. These women are arguing taxation without representation, right? They're working and making money, and with the income tax being passed, they can be taxed on that, but they're not represented in government in terms of voting, right? And so that violates the principles of the Declaration of Independence. So these women are going to work throughout the late 19th century, right? And you can see how bold this is, standing on corners to raise money for the effort, okay? You know, surrounded by guys. A lot of these women were attacked. I mean, I've seen photographs of women being beaten by the male crowd or by police for their efforts. Eventually, they're going to win the vote because of the hypocrisy inherent in the crusade that is World War I. You're going to learn from me later this week that the United States is going to enter World War I. One of the slogans is to make the world safe for democracy, okay? Which is great crusade, except that even women at home can't vote. So to fight this war to make the world safe for democracy, when the United States denies democracy, I mean, let's be honest, to Black Americans at home, but to women, all right, that is a hypocrisy that ultimately cannot hold, all right? And after World War I, and partly in as a response to so many women willingly working in the factories to produce goods during World War I, the 19th Amendment will be passed, okay? And here is Alice Paul, who was a tireless suffragist. I mean, she was a rock star. And she was jailed several times, insisted on being treated as a political prisoner when she was jailed, and used a hunger strike as a tactic for which she was force-fed by the authorities. This political image here kind of gives you guys a sense of what one of the main fears was about women's voting, right? I don't think it takes a genius to take a look at what's going on with this image here and the real fear in gender reversals. If you give, women are already working, now you give them the vote, then why do they need men anymore? And you guys get the picture, okay? This kind of women doing things that men do, like working, like voting, is going to kind of resurface again later with the second wave of the feminist movement. This is the first wave of the feminist movement, which is the goal to get voting rights. But this idea of the defeminization of women is going to come back later with the second wave of the feminist movement. And of course, the 19th Amendment. All right, prohibition. So with prohibition, the temperance movement, again, reminding you, had been going on since the antebellum period. Kind of got shelved for a while. Now with the growth of cities throughout the late 19th century, it had come back with a vengeance. I taught you before about people like D.L. Moody or Billy Sunday and these street preachers in the Third Great Awakening, right? And with the advent of World War I, when that war ends, okay, we are going to pass the 18th Amendment, the so-called Prohibition Amendment, and it's partially a way of sticking it to German immigrants, because German immigrants in this country are the ones that brew beer, for example, and it's kind of a way to stick it to them because we had to fight them in World War I. But it's also a moral crusade of the Third Great Awakening, and alcohol leads you to sin. So if you want to address the sin, remove the temptation, right? And you're going to see prohibition particularly is going to affect the major urban centers. We'll talk about how when we get to the 1920s. But obviously, you're likelier to have dry towns in the country already. So this is more like for the cities, but it is going to be an amendment, so it's going to involve the entire United States. And the law is alcohol, see ya, all right? at least until we come back to our senses. Here is a famous member of the temperance movement at this time, Carrie Nation, and her involvement with the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She was so ardent in her religious zeal to get rid of alcohol that she would carry a hatchet and she would enter bars and just destroy the bar, right? Just you take her hatchet to the bars and to the like tables and stuff like that, and to the whiskey bottles and whatnot. And what are you gonna do? Stop her, this lady with a hatchet? And she meant business, and she would even, you know, walk in there and say to the barkeep, so good morning, sir. How many souls have you ruined today? Like that kind of a thing. So it's people like her that are going to get prohibition passed with the ending of World War I. Okay. So now that I've taken you through kind of what muckraker and social progressivism looks like, this is kind of the non-political side. I mean, these are people acting socially to get a political change to happen, all right? These aren't presidents and senators and stuff. So to end the lesson today, I'm going to ask that you read this excerpt from Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, which was an expose of the meatpacking industry that many of you are familiar with. It will be instrumental in help passing the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. And you can see the prompt here. I decided we haven't done enough compare and contrast. So compare the extent to which Upton Sinclair's The Jungle illustrates the plight of immigrant workers in these factories and reveals the misconduct of the meatpacking industry. So there's two things going on here. What is happening to the workers, right, that reveals the like nastiness they have to deal with? And then what's actually in your meat that's also disgusting and nasty, right? Because he does both. And I want you to compare those two things he's doing and which one seems to have the most effect, okay? We're going to talk about this journal the next time I see you this week. So Wednesday, we have the guidance counselors coming in for a lesson with you guys again about naviance and letters of rec and stuff. So I'll see you on Wednesday, but we'll probably talk about this again on Thursday/Friday, okay? So get this journal done, spend the rest of the period getting this done. And if you haven't finished your previous journal on Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, you can do that as well. Okay, so that's it. And I'll see you guys when I see you next.